Hello and welcome to the Questioning Behaviour podcast. As always, my name is Sarah and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Merle and Sarah.
Hey.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the dummy that don't...
Today, as always, we are going to be talking about a topic relevant to behavioural science. And in this instance, it's all about behavioural design. How to design stuff like a behavioural scientist.
Ooh,
sounds interesting. Sounds good. So
you can just tell from this intro that we know absolutely nothing about behavioral design because we're just like, ooh, but yeah, we've got nothing. So sorry.
Well, it's a good job it's not just going to be us today. Otherwise, the podcast would be quite short, right? Yeah,
it would be really short. I think half of the time I'd be on Wikipedia trying to figure out what direction we would go in. I'm pretty sure you'd be reading an academic paper in the background.
So, I mean, when was the last time you sort of took stock and redesigned your environment, right, to try and get yourself to do something more or do something less? Like, is that something that you've ever done before for yourself?
Ooh, that's a very good question. The only thing I can really think of is that recently, so I'm old school, right? So I used to have a paper diary. But with how quickly my plans are shifting around and meetings get cancelled and stuff gets moved and and as a PhD student, one of the things that is both an advantage and a massive disadvantage is that you can be quite flexible with your time. And as a result, you will have to be quite flexible with your time because everyone else also assumes that flexibility. So I've shifted everything into just Excel worksheets. And then as the second lockdown kicked in the UK, which is definitely going to date this episode a bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's the fourth wall. We're recording this on the 11th of November. There you go.
Oh no, you've done it now.
Yeah, I've done it
now.
They know
too much.
They know. But I shifted everything to the extent where I've got an Excel sheet which plans everything by half an hour, and to make sure I exercise and I can actually go outside and take a walk, which is still allowed. I'm planning it in, and it is the one thing that is not at all flexible, and it's rigid as hell, and no one is allowed to come between me and my online workouts and my walk in the afternoon, and that is a golden rule, and that does not budge from the Excel sheet. So
nice.
Is that even design? I think that's just planning or goal setting. Can you come up with something yourself?
I've recently made my workspace much more enjoyable to be in because I bought myself a new monitor.
Very nice.
Okay, I've got this. I mean, it's right. I'm looking at it right now as I'm talking to you. I've seen myself on the screen, and this monitor is beautiful. And I spent a long time researching this monitor to find exactly the one that fit all my specifications, and I enjoy using it because of that. Right. And yeah, I sort of feel that now I want to sit down and do work. So wow. I guess part of that behavioral design is sort of filling a space that I need to be in to be productive with stuff that I enjoy, like equipment that I want to use. Right. That's making it much easier for me to sort of facilitate sort of focusing and things like that. And the other thing that it is, it's like this, it's an ultra wide screen and it's slightly curved. So in terms of my periphery vision, if I'm looking at the screen, I'm actually, I don't really get distracted now as much as I used to, right? When the screen was smaller and I can, things in the side of my vision, right? So it kind of I don't know, maybe I'm describing this as though I'm in the bloody Matrix, but yeah. So that's been really good. I mean, I wonder how long it will last, right? I feel like sometimes the novelty does wear off, but for now, I'm not jinxing it, but I've been super productive, so.
Okay, so I've been good with exercise. You've been good with work. I think, I mean, I have this sneaking suspicion that what we're describing is not remotely behavioral design, but just an aspect of design and just habit formation. So how about we shut our own traps and we take it to the interview so that hopefully Amy can actually, explain to us what's actually going on and what we can expect and hope to expect from good behavioral design. Today we are talking to Amy Bucher. Amy, as always in this show, please introduce yourself. Who are you?
Hi, so my name is Amy, and I am the Vice President of Behavior Change Design at MadPow, which is a design and strategy agency in the United States. I have a PhD in psychology, and I've spent my career applying that education to designing interventions to help people with behavior change. So I've done a lot of work in healthcare and health behaviors. In the last 5 or so years at MadPow, I've extended that work into financial services and things like helping people prepare for retirement and pay down debt. And I've also done a lot of work in digital as well as experience design, so kind of all over the design world. And I live in Boston, Massachusetts in the US. I like to read. I have 3 cats, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Oh, amazing. I love that you've got 3 cats. I'm on 1, but I think if I get one every year, I'll reach those levels.
I was on the plan to 0 cats and it failed. So I had 2. I adopted 2 cats when I was in grad school, which I highly recommend actually, because they're wonderful companions. And like when I had late nights writing my dissertation, I had a friend with me who would sit in my lap and, make me feel loved. One of them passed away a few years ago and his brother really missed him. So we figured we'll adopt a pair of kittens. And that way, the other old cat maybe doesn't have so long, but he's hanging in there. He's doing great. So I have 3 cats.
Amazing. There's a sort of an exponential growth of cats, maybe.
Absolutely. And actually one of them is over here now meowing. So if you do hear anything, that's why.
Amazing.
Cute.
Amazing. An extra guest for free. We love it. So I'm interested to hear more about your work as a sort of would you call yourself like a behavioral science practitioner, or would you call yourself an academic who practitions? Like, how would you place yourself?
I consider myself squarely a practitioner with academic training, but it's funny you ask that because, I think throughout my career, and I think that everybody does this to some extent, you think about what is your role and what would you like your role to be as part of your own career planning. And one of the things that I find myself saying often these days is that I am a practitioner and I love to be a practitioner. I find that really fulfilling, and I think I learn a lot in doing the applied work. But I do try to keep a foot in the academic world in the sense that I have a strong network of people who sit squarely in academia. And it's important to keep up to date with the research that crew is doing in order to inform the work that I'm doing as a practitioner.
Fair enough. What academic work are you currently looking at predominantly to inform the work that you're currently doing yourself?
So I tried to stay really plugged into the work that the self-determination theory researchers are doing. And a lot of those researchers are centered at the University of Rochester, but of course they're really all over the world in all different universities. But because so much of my work is rooted in motivational science, I try to stay abreast of what's happening there. I also cheat a little bit. I don't have the time I used to when I was a student, when I would read the primary sources and spend a lot of time directly in the databases. So one of the things that I really like to do now is follow academics on Twitter. And, I chase the links that they post and kind of read sometimes it's the article about the article instead of reading the primary source directly. And I also really like to read pop psychology books, especially ones that are by kind of credible, academic type people, because they do a really nice job summarizing the literature and making it really accessible. So it's a faster way for me to stay on top of things than diving into the primary sources myself. But really motivation, self-determination theory, those are the main areas I try to stay abreast of. And then I'll also read up on digital health. Often if I'm working on a project for work that has a domain specificity. So for example, I just finished a project on behavioral health. I'll spend a lot of time looking into the literature that's really current around that topic. And similarly, I will shortcut that by following people on Twitter and, seeing what people are talking about. Where's the buzz?
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a good hack. I like that. So I guess for the listener and also for myself, can you tell me a little bit more about self-determination theory? What is the sort of the central tenet of the idea behind it?
Yeah, there's 2 things that I tend to talk about a lot and use a lot with respect to self-determination theory. So the first is the idea that motivational quality, the thing that is motivating you, matters a lot more than just the amount of motivation. And I think in everyday speech, we tend to talk about being highly motivated or not very motivated, but it's really more than that. It's what is motivating you. And in self-determination theory, they have a continuum of types of motivation that are arranged from the most extrinsic to the most intrinsic. And the closer you can get to intrinsic, the more long-lasting and powerful that motivation is. So the takeaway for me in my work is that it's really important to understand what people value, how they think of themselves. Like identity is really important, because if you consider yourself a certain type of person, if you have values that dictate the way that you would like to be, that is a motivator. So if I can design things that tap into that or that help people be more the way they want to be, that's something they'll be more interested in doing. And then the second piece of self-determination theory that I use a lot is this idea that people like to engage in experiences that support their fundamental psychological needs, basic psychological needs. So you might see the acronym BPN, and that's basic psychological need. But according to self-determination theory, there are three that all people have, and they are autonomy, or the need to make meaningful choices for yourself, competence, the need to learn and grow, and then relatedness, the need to feel connected to something bigger than yourself, whether it's in a relationship with a small group of other people, or I actually think there's a lot of utility in thinking about things like belonging to a community, belonging even to like the brotherhood of man, I say as a woman to two women.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But like this sort of squidgy sense of belonging and not being alone in the universe is something people seek out. And so if we can design products and experiences that tap into those things, people will stick with them longer, and you get more of an opportunity to kind of connect them to those things that matter to them so that they change their behaviors. So those are the two big kind of takeaways from self-determination theory that are really useful in design.
All right. So following from that, so you've already mentioned that you've done a lot of work in health, and then you've transitioned to doing a lot of work in finance. Was that transition easy because both of these are very much based on self-determination theory, just applied to a slightly different field? Or was this a much harder transition than I'm making it out to be?
It was easier than I feared it would be, but it wasn't completely simple. And I'll be totally honest. Part of the reason why is because I have a passion for health that I don't have for finance. So
you're forgiven.
Yes. Health camp over here.
Yeah, every project that I do, like the initial period, the spin-up period, involves getting educated on the topic of the project. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot easier for me on a health project because I just think it's like in another world, I would have been a medical doctor. So,
okay.
I really enjoy taking the time to research like what causes hypertension in a different way than, what causes bankruptcy.
I can't relate. I don't relate. Bankruptcy all the way.
In terms of like the processes that are going on though, the human psychology and the behavior, they're really similar because we're talking about, complex behaviors, complex topic areas. And we're asking people to make behavior changes today that hopefully will translate to some kind of outcome down the road. But there's also a lot of uncertainty. We can't prove to somebody that if they make behavior changes today, that they will, definitely have the funds that they want in 30 years to live out their retirement dream, or that they will definitely avoid developing a chronic condition that impacts their quality of life. So there's a little bit of, you have to communicate to people that we're asking you to do something concrete today for the promise of something in the future that you may or may not actually receive. And that's a complicated thing to ask people to do. And then in addition, I think just the fact that the subject matter in both health and finance tends to be opaque to people. The average person is not very well educated on either. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of need to consider things like terminology, like breaking down large goals into smaller milestones, providing tools and visualization to help people see their progress along the way. Those are really common. And so that part of the transition has been quite easy.
All right. But why did you make the transition? Why did you switch?
Well, I took a job with MadPow, and part of the work that we do is in the financial services industry. So, part of my role as a MadPow employee is to work on these projects. And I will say, we tend to have a lot of finance projects that edge into the health area. And this is not something that people outside of the United States experience as much, but, our healthcare system is unique. And we have the health insurance industry as well as healthcare being the primary driver of bankruptcy in the United States. And so that means a lot of the financial topics that we work on have this relationship to health. So it sort of all fits together in a gestalt. But I did. I guess I did work a little bit on finance prior to joining MadPow when I worked on projects where there was a large cost component or where people were making behavioral decisions because of financial considerations. But this is the first job I've had where I've really directly focused on the finance component of it.
Yeah, I suppose from a US perspective, health and finance really do go hand in hand, for better or for worse.
Yeah,
probably for worse.
I would say usually for worse. It's very rare that somebody celebrates how closely tied together those two things are.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of interested. I mean, given your sort of rich experience of investigating these sort of questions about behavior, about why people behave in a certain way, or whether an intervention works in a certain context, what's the biggest difference between running a project within academia and running a project as a practitioner in the real world? Sort of trying to answer a similar question, but what are the differences there? And I love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so my first instinct was a little bit glib, which is to say there's more money as a practitioner, and that actually it makes a difference. So, for example, if you're in an academic setting and you want to run a study, recruiting participants is a little bit more difficult, I think, because either they are being and this may be different outside of the US, but in my experience in the US, they're either being compensated with course credit because they are undergraduate students who are taking a psychology course and it's part of their requirements, or you're paying them a nominal amount of money, something like $10 for a half hour of their time or an hour of their time. And, that's part of why we have this weird phenomenon, right? The
Western, educated,
right,
industrialized, rich, democratic. Sorry.
Yep. No,
I memorized it.
Thank you, because I didn't, and that was why I stopped. I couldn't remember. But yeah, that's part of the driver of the weird phenomenon, because we're basically recruiting from our undergraduate population. In industry, we have a much bigger budget behind our recruitment. So for most of the studies that I do as a practitioner, we work with third-party recruitment firms, and we have a decent budget from our clients where we're able to compensate people something that more approximates an hourly rate that they would get from a job, and like a good job too. So, we can pay people $100 for an hour, with the understanding that we're asking them very intimate questions about their life and their health and their finances. So that makes doing the research a lot easier. We're able to complete studies much more quickly because of that. And then that kind of leads into the second answer, which is the application of the research is different. In academia, a lot of the research is really to inform the knowledge about a particular concept or phenomenon. We want to know more about motivation. We want to continue to get more detailed on our understanding of motivation and what are the mediators and the moderators of motivation in this context. It's almost like academic research often has knowledge for its own sake as an aim. In my experience as a practitioner, we are almost always doing the research in order to inform a very specific business goal. So it might be to get a product out into the market, or to improve an existing product, or to achieve some sort of key performance indicator for our client. But having that applied aim for the research changes a lot of the dynamics of it. And one of them is the speed at which the research gets done. So, I think there's very little patience in the practitioner world for things that take a long time, because those business goals are really driving it.
Fair enough. Sounds good. So I know a large aspect of your job focuses on design or behavioral design, whatever the appropriate title is, because I know I've recently been told that behavioral health is not what we think it is. So now I'm worried that behavioral design might not be what we think it is. So where does design come into play within these projects? Is it there from the get-go and just becomes increasingly more involved, or how am I supposed to see this?
Yeah, I think it is there from the get-go. I actually will say, I would argue that their formative research is part of design, even though at this stage we're not producing any kind of artifact. But the research that we do to get grounded in the problem space typically also is grounding ourselves in what we need for the design process. So with this project that I'm working on right now, ultimately part of what we'll produce, we're doing personas or behavioral archetypes. We are doing journey maps, and we're also doing screen designs, but there is an existing digital product. So we've been spending a lot of time in that existing digital product, really learning how it works and trying to understand what are the parts of it that are open for redesign and what are the parts of it that are not, we can't touch, because, you know, there are reasons within the client company why they are the way they are, and that just, we have to live with that and design around them. So even though we're focused on research, in our minds, we're also trying to gear that research towards what we know we can touch in the design. But once we finish the research, we will basically look at our data and we will derive insights from it. So like, we've heard all these things. What are the key points that we've heard pretty consistently across the respondents in our population? And then given these insights, what are the things that we need to do in the design? And so we basically will transition at that point at the end of research into what I think you're thinking of when you say design, where we really work with the people who are creating the visuals, creating the requirements documents. I myself do not create visuals. I just don't have that skill set, but I will draw like really crappy, mock wireframes and things, and annotate. But what I'll typically do at that point is actually sit down with members of the team who have that skill set and kind of verbally describe, like, this is what the product is going to need to do. They'll sketch something up that I will comment on and annotate, and they'll revise. And so it's like we communicate through their sketches. But sometimes I do find that to jumpstart it, I have to make my own little crappy sketch. And I'm always really embarrassed about it because my coworkers who do design are so talented. And sometimes that what we produce is not a visual. Sometimes it's a strategy or a strategy playbook. And so it's basically an instruction manual for our clients to go implement something. And it may be a digital product, like it may be, here's the thing you need to build, or oftentimes it's also an experience. So, you know, if you're servicing, and that might be the case with this current client, it's a financial services client. And so they have, there's digital systems with them. They have advisors who are serving their clients, you know, the people investing their money through them. And so the recommendations that we make might be about that process. You know, how do your advisors support what clients are experiencing in the digital environment? How is your phone support supporting what clients are experiencing in the digital environment? We consider all of those different channels and touch points and make recommendations about how they can work together to support an outcome.
Cool. So a more like holistic view of the problem and the offshoots of what the solution could be. That's yeah, I don't know whether you would agree with that.
Yeah, so I used the term already, I think, in our conversation, experience strategy. And that's part of what it refers to, is really understanding the different channels through which a user might experience a product, a service, a company, and making sure that those channels are working together.
How, I mean, in your experience, you must have come across many examples of like unintended consequences of, you know, getting involved in a situation, whether it's, you know, with good intentions of changing the design of the environment for good,
or not so good
in your experience, or not so good. Not your personal experience, but I mean, is this a very common thing to experience as a practitioner, like dealing with these unintended consequences? And how do you, move forward, sort of thinking, oh gosh, I could set off, you know, a butterfly flapping its wings and set off something that has big consequences that weren't taken into account at the beginning.
I think you're right. There's a lot of examples of it. And I have been fortunate. I've never personally been involved in anything where I would say there's been a really negative result. The thing I encounter a lot, though, and especially when I worked for a company that created health behavior change platforms for a business-to-business model, where we would sell to like a large employer and then they'd make our product available to their employees, is incentives to participate in something often have those sorts of unintended consequences. People are super smart about understanding what they need to do specifically to achieve an award. And we found that our customers would get this idea like, oh, okay, I've invested in this health behavior change platform and I want my employees to use it, so I will pay them to use it. And then they will change their health behaviors. And the value to our customers, right, was not that people use the platform. It's that they use the platform, they change their behaviors, and then they get healthier. So they really needed to go through that whole behavior change for the platform to deliver its value. Mm-hmm. But what people often will do is they reward use of the platform. And so the unintended consequence there is they get high participation, but poor outcomes, because people using the platform means you go online, you finish the questionnaire and like download your plan. It does not mean that you read the plan or follow the plan or do anything related to the plan. And so, you know, I would say that's the unintended consequence I've personally encountered most often is, and it creates a false, or maybe not false. We don't know actually, because we don't have the data, but it creates a perception that the product doesn't work because from the customer perspective, people are using it, but nothing's happening in the data. From my perspective, they're not really using it. You didn't apply the incentive to use. I would say in the bigger sense, though, like where there's these really kind of hairy unintended consequences, we do brainstorming as part of our process. So I mentioned we have this transition from where we do the research, we get the insights, we start to think about the product. Like that's kind of a generative brainstorming time. And before the COVID pandemic, we would sit in a room, and we have 2 rooms in our office that have paint on the walls that it's like whiteboard paint. So you can write on it with dry erase markers.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it's cool. So we'll actually like sketch on the walls, and we have Post-its, and we can move things around, and we try to generate ideas. And that's a point in the process where we can take the effort to think about some of these unintended consequences. So there are structured brainstorming techniques that you can use to think about like, okay, what would happen if an evil person got control of this product? What's the worst thing they could do? And some of the things that you can think of, they seem silly, but it's like, all right, let's pretend an evil person did get a hold of this. How do we design it in a way that doesn't happen? So that sort of technique, that sort of counterfactual thinking can be really helpful.
I was going to say, is that a good tactic to sort of try and combat, you know, your own hindsight bias in general? I guess, you know, when you think about unintended consequences, we only have the consequences that we've observed and also have already happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps. It's never 100%. Like, you can't really step completely outside of your own biases. It's also why I think it's important to do some of these activities collaboratively and to think about, you know, having a diverse team of people as much as you can. And, you know, thinking about diversity as ethnic and racial diversity, age diversity, gender diversity, but also diversity of background and training. Because there are things that someone, like, for example, a software engineer is able to point to potential negative consequences that are not visible to me as a behavior scientist. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've learned over my career, I have worked in teams where we've tended to isolate different skill sets at different senses of the process. Like, okay, the researchers are doing research. The application developers are doing application development. And I think that model opens the opportunity for some of these mistakes because you're missing the chance to have the different skill sets comment on each other's work and point things out. So we do try really hard, even though like our visual designers are not doing the research because that's not their interest or their skills. Like they're actually involved in some of the meetings around the research. They're aware of the research plan. They've had the opportunity to look at the moderator guides that we'll be using so that they understand that, you know, that they have the opportunity to raise their hand early in the process and say, have you thought about this?
And not like 17 meetings in whilst there's almost a ready product and being like, yeah, well, it could have been done this way. Let's redo the whole thing. 5 months of additional work.
Right. And that's the other thing to these timelines associated with being in the practitioner world. Like we often really can't go back and change things. Like what happens in that case is we've made a bunch of suboptimal decisions that we get stuck with, and we don't want that. So it's
Clearly.
Much better to take the time early on and have the entire team present for some of these ground setting conversations and then avoid some of the mistakes.
Gotcha. So mentioning this type of collaboration where you have people, obviously a visual designer is not a behavioral scientist, quite clearly, but still people from all types of different backgrounds and all types of different training. Do you have much adversarial collaboration?
Much adversarial collaboration. I'm going to answer that, but first I will say I have worked with people who are behavior scientists and visual designers. So it happens. And it's awesome because they can take the behavior change stuff and make it visual.
Okay, I stand corrected. I am very sorry.
It's rare. It's rare. Most of us are trained to produce words, not images, but I've met a few people and I love working with them. Adversarial collaboration, yes. I would say, though, it's becoming less common. I think behavior science in the design world is becoming more common. And so we have more people who understand what we can contribute to the process and are willing and sometimes hopefully excited to have that. But I have definitely encountered people who have said, why do we need behavior science? We already do that. One of the places I've encountered it most often in my career working with large organizations is in the marketing team, because they do so much research on their consumers. They have tons of data. They run these really large scale surveys, and they may do product tests. A lot of the activities they do, I understand why they see it as being really similar to behavior change or behavior science.
Sure.
And what I settled on saying is that they have a really rich knowledge of what their consumers are doing, but they typically haven't investigated why they're doing it. And that makes it harder for them to predict what they will do in the future. So I think that's part of what behavior science adds to a marketing organization. And so I worked for Johnson & Johnson for a number of years. This is really where I encountered that the most often, because they have an incredible marketing team. And we would be working on a project for them, and they would say, you don't need to do new research. We have this 12,000 person survey of our consumers of the product. You can look at that and find the data. And we would have to push back and say, well, we really don't understand what their challenges are in this particular context around your product. Like we know a lot from this survey about what they like to use and what their other product use is, all those sorts of things that marketers ask. But like, we really need to understand the challenges they're facing in their daily life and why they might be interested in this product or not. And, it usually takes a couple of case studies too. It was like the first project, they worked with us because they had to, because somebody higher up had decided, like, you're going to include this behavior science team in the project, and they didn't really have a choice about it. But it worked out pretty well. It turns out that behavior science and marketing are good bedfellows, and we we really collaborate well together. And I personally appreciate having the type of data that they collect that I would never collect, but it does help inform my work too.
Fair enough.
Interesting.
Maybe we should align ourselves more with the marketing team. I mean, I'm in a business school. They can't be difficult to find.
No. And I mean, but seriously, they have so many data points, and I find that it can spark inspiration about what type of research you might do, or, oh, hey, there may be a barrier here that I hadn't considered, because look at like this correlation between these things people are doing that I would not have expected.
Fair enough.
So I wonder then, would you say that behavioral science is, or as a behavioral scientist, sort of actual collaboration across disciplines and skills, that's where behavioral science can do the most enriching in people's lives, rather than staying in a bubble of just behavioral scientists talking to behavioral scientists about behavioral science? Is that what we should be aiming to do? Branch out of our bubbles a little bit?
I mean, I'm very biased because I'm an applied behavior scientist. I'm a practitioner. And so just by nature of that, I'm working outside of behavior science. I work in a design and strategy agency, and that's really the first way that I present myself. So I do believe that breaking out of the bubble is the way that we can have the most impact. I think we need both, though. I think it's really important that we have some people who are focused on building up the body of behavior science knowledge and thinking about things in this, I'll call it a pure way. I said before, I think academics are seeking to contribute to kind of the body of knowledge and generalizable knowledge. And that's what I would consider, I guess, the pure research. I think it's really important. I need to have that understanding in order to do my work well. But the work that I do that I think is also really important is taking that knowledge and building some additional knowledge that's very applied and contextualized to create things that go out in the world and impact people's daily experience.
A very diplomatic answer.
Very diplomatic for sure. So I have a more specific question, which the more we talk to practitioners, the more this topic seems to come up. It's become quite popular in academia. It's become quite popular in the behavioral science practitioning as well. But that's kind of the unwelcome elephant in the room, and that is the ethics that is behind all of this. So how do you think this is being regulated? Is this being regulated well enough? Have you seen some things where you were just like, oh, that can't be right? Because you already mentioned this. What if we create something that the most evil person in the world gets their hands on? Is this really more a question about ethics and what is and what isn't right to just push into the world?
Yeah, and I guess maybe you're right. Ethics is the evil elephant in the room. I like having that elephant there. I think it's something we need to talk about and need to consider. And I guess enjoy is not maybe the right word, but I appreciate the intellectual challenge of grappling with it. it's certainly not being regulated. There's no regulatory body really, and it varies company by company how much oversight there is to ethics. I think that's something academia does better than industry, is think about the ethical implications of their work. If you are running if you're running a study through a university, it gets submitted to the Institutional Review Board. It's scrutinized to make sure that it's, the human subjects ethics are right. And even things like I mentioned before, in terms of compensating people for research, I don't think academic research pays people enough, but I know sometimes practitioner research pays them too much, and that becomes coercive when you are not able to say no in good conscience to the amount of money somebody's offering to pay you. So, I think industry needs to get better. And so far what I've seen is that it's individual people within organizations who have really advocated for this ethical viewpoint and made it part of the way of doing work who've gotten traction. I feel really lucky. I work at a place where my colleagues and I are pretty much on the same page about ethics. And we've had situations where a client has suggested something and we're able to say, you know what, that's not the way we do things. Here's why we don't do it that way. Here's a suggestion of a different way to do it that we believe will be successful for your goals. And so far, that has tended to work pretty well for us. One squidgy area, I don't remember if this made it into my book or not. I definitely wrote a long rant about it. And my editor at one point was like, Amy, you've got to stop with the ethical thing. Yeah, basically, like we get it.
Yeah, you're passionate about it, but I think this is too aggressive for your readers.
Yeah,
you just need a podcast to rant and rave it.
Come on, Amy, this is your moment. Vent.
All right, I'm going to do it. One of the ways where I think these ethical issues come up is when people try to slalom between the academic and the applied worlds. And the example of that is most well known is Facebook, where I think it was like 2014 they published that article about their ability to manipulate people's emotions by subtly tweaking what they saw in their newsfeed. Yeah. And they did not run that research through an IRB. So, they
it never would have gotten through.
No, well, and part of it was because there wasn't really truly informed consent of the participants. They agreed to the terms of service of using Facebook. And when that gets updated, you get the little notification that like, hey, we've updated our terms of service, but nobody clicks on that. That's not really informed consent. It's like if you, I don't know, threw a piece of mail on somebody's porch, you say, oh, I informed them, but you don't know if they read it or not. And in fact, you can probably guess that they didn't. Mm-hmm. And what happened there, like if that research had been done in an academic setting, which it should have been because it was intended to inform the body of generalizable knowledge, it would have gone through an IRB, and the IRB would have said, you need to get informed consent. You need to put something up on people's news feeds and have them click yes or no about whether they're willing to have their news feed changed in order for their data to be included in this study. And I think what probably happened there behind the scenes was not a bunch of evil masterminds sitting in a conference room thinking, how can we get around the ethical boundaries here? I think it was probably people who had, enough training to put together a pretty good study, but were working in an industry where they don't often use an IRB and said, hey, we can just do this. And you can't, because the reason that industry research doesn't go through those same ethical hoops is because it's very applied. It's about improving a particular product or service. And that was not the purpose of this research. So, it's when you slalom between these two worlds, you really have to be careful about, I would just say, use the most stringent ethical guidelines of the two. So if you're not sure, go to the IRB. There are lots of institutional review boards that you can use, even if you're not affiliated with the university. And I would rather be cautious than misstep and lose people's trust.
Yeah, that's very fair.
It's an interesting point, I think, about like researcher intent, like what is the intention behind the research? So, I mean, given everything else held constant, if that research itself was being sort of framed in a way of them sort of saying, look, we want to see if we can try and, make it so that the terms of conditions page, gives people the feeling of disgust so they don't read it because we don't want them to spend time on that. We want them to spend time on other things where the marketing, the ads are, that's where we get the ad revenue. Given that that's still sort of ethically, I would say, not just ambiguous, like pretty poor like ethics in terms of like the consumer experience and manipulation, but the intent would have been to enhance a service. Like, is that then in the same realm of ethical considerations? How do you weigh these two things?
So I think part of it too with Facebook is people were not getting what they expected from the experience when they were doing that study. Because the expectation is I'm going to connect with my friends, and when I log in, I will see the updates my friends provided. And they have, I can't remember if at that time they were really pushing their own algorithm yet or not, but it used to be that you would order it by recency, or they have their newsfeed algorithm. And I think it's like the most popular or the most interacted with posts rise to the top. But either way, you have this expectation that there's a set of rules that are determining what I see. But basically, it's like I'm seeing what my friends are seeing, and it's not super influenced by Facebook. And when they made the change to, try to see if they could influence people's emotional reactions, that was giving a false bill of goods. That wasn't what people expected to get. And I think that's a big part of it. It's a little bit different from, I don't know, if you were playing with the code to see how quickly things loaded, which would be a product improvement. Okay. Or, tweaking the colors to see if people liked it. Or Facebook just rolled out a new visual, layout change. That's the sort of thing where I feel like, ethically, there's not a lot to it. It's the appearance of the site. You're not necessarily giving people a different experience than they expected in a meaningful sense. But when you change what they're seeing from their friends, like that is a meaningful change to what they came to that product to do.
All right. Then I have a design question as well, because I look at LinkedIn today. I say it as if I never look at LinkedIn. I look at LinkedIn on a daily basis, which is obsessive, and I should probably stop. But LinkedIn has also changed their layout, and I now think it looks a lot more like Facebook, which I don't want to interact with LinkedIn the way I interact with Facebook, or vice versa. I don't think that's right. So from a slightly more design perspective, but also from an ethical and user interaction perspective, is that then okay? Or is this something we should also kind of think a bit more about?
So your podcast is called Questioning Behaviour. I really question that behavior. Like I do think we should think about that. And I have trouble with schools of design, like BJ Fogg's model. At least initially, it was really intended to optimize time on site, right? We want people to click as much as possible. And to a point, that is a fine goal, but beyond that point, it is not. And I think a lot of designers and a lot of the business metrics around digital products are set up in such a way that it's moving people towards just trying to maximize time on site. And I do think that's problematic. In behavior science, we think about a dose response, or I should broaden that. It's like public health, medicine, kind of all the health sciences, which is this idea that there is a certain amount of an intervention that is the right amount to drive outcomes. And the way that most people are familiar with it is with medication. There's a dose that's recommended, and that's all, deliberately determined. This is the optimal amount of this product that you take to get to the outcomes while minimizing harmful side effects. Similarly with behavior science, when we have behavior change interventions, typically there's an amount of exposure that is the right amount of exposure to get to those results. And that gets completely ignored when you're just trying to optimize time on site. I do spend time with clients. And again, this was more in some of my past life where I was focused on a specific product. So I stayed with the product across clients, where now with each client, I might be working on a different product. But with the product I used to work on, we didn't have a ton of time on site. Like people would spend a lot of time when they first used it, and they would come back a few times, but they weren't really coming back super often. Okay. We were still getting good results, and we would have to have a conversation with our clients where we'd say, we've built an experience that has a lot of upfront education. And once a user sits down and goes through that education and they've learned that material, they don't need to revisit it. And in fact, if we've done our job correctly, they shouldn't need to revisit it, because we've written it in a way that's clear and understandable and memorable, and that they can immediately apply to making some changes to their daily routines. So in fact, like in some ways, we might see their failure to keep returning to that part of the product as a success metric. Yeah. But then you look at how businesses track their success, right? And it's like, how many visits to the site, how many logins, how much time on page. It just doesn't work. It's not consistent.
All right.
So we need to overhaul these metrics then, right? It's, you set the goal and the behavior follows, right? To try and reach that goal. I mean, is there any work being done, I don't know, as a behavioral scientist or as in general, about trying to get companies and regulators to change the goalposts slightly?
I haven't touched to me, it's just such a huge beast to think about, like how companies report their, business outcomes and their goals and things like that. So I haven't really thought about it from more of an advocacy perspective, but on each project that I do, I try to think about and communicate to my client, like what the order of events might be for them to understand if this product is successful. So I use this tool called an outcomes logic map. And I spend a lot of time in my book talking about how to lay one out. And I'm actually working on one now for a client it's fairly complicated. I'm like, oh, wow. When I wrote an example for a book that was intended to be clear, that was way easier than doing it for a real client and a real product. But basically, we think about what are the business key performance indicators that you want to achieve. And those are typically, it's return on investment. I want to buy this product or this service, and then I want to make money because I invested in it. And then there's usually some other ones, like in healthcare, we'll often see things like, I want people to use emergency services less frequently, because that would suggest that they're taking care of their health and they're avoiding catastrophic health events. Okay, well, in order for this to happen, in order for you to see a return on investment, or in order for fewer people to use emergency services, what behaviors do they need to engage in? And, maybe they need to be going for their preventative medical exams, and they need to, be eating more broccoli. Just make something up.
Sure.
And then this is the key part. Okay, in order for us to get them to do these behaviors, what do we actually need to provide them in the product? And this is where we can detail out, like maybe we do need them to use this app every single day because it has reminders and they can log what they're doing and it will give them in the moment coaching. Or maybe it's that we need to deliver them this one-time education. If it's something like they need to get their preventative doctor exams, maybe we need to have them talk to a consultant who's going to sit down and actually schedule all those things for them. And that's not something that necessarily is repeated every single day or week or month. But getting that clarity around, okay, this is what you're trying to achieve, and here are the steps that lead up to it, can help set expectations that it's not all about the clicks. It's not just about maximizing time on site.
Is that the future? Or are you hoping that's the future, or do you think that's going to be the future?
I'm trying to make it the future.
Very nice answer.
A noble goal.
Yeah. I hope it is. I think that there will always be pressure. Every company, every product team wants their product to be the one, right? I think a lot of people want to be like Facebook. If you look at how much, I'll tell even me, I try not to use Facebook that much, and I don't have the Facebook app on my phone, but I do have Instagram and LinkedIn. I actually got rid of LinkedIn on my phone as well for this. It's just too much like Facebook. It tries to suck you in and it does not feel productive. But I have Instagram because I love photography and visuals. And, I actually find it really soothing. I follow like travel and food and animals.
Gotcha.
But I get this digital well-being report on my phone every Sunday night. And I'm always shocked at the amount of time I spend on Instagram. Shocked. It's like upwards of an hour a day. And it doesn't feel like that because it's in small bursts and increments. And I'll have the TV on and I'm sort of not really paying attention, scrolling through Instagram, but it adds up. And I think a lot of companies and product teams, they want that to be their app, right? Look at what Instagram can charge for an ad campaign. It's unbelievable.
I don't actually know.
It's a lot. I can't give you a dollar amount. I just read the book. I just read No Filter about Instagram, the book about Instagram. And I was like, oh, geez, they are hauling in cash from advertisers.
And aren't they owned by Facebook as well?
They are. They're operated semi-autonomously within Facebook.
Okay.
Although that seems to be becoming less and less.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, everybody wants that for their product, right? Of course you do. Like we all want to make more money and be the most popular, the most well-loved. But realistically, there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many, you can only have one app open on your phone at a time. And so I think that we're more likely to be successful if we just get realistic from the beginning and think, what is it we really need to achieve? And what is the way that we can achieve that most sensibly? And it's not going to be to become the next Facebook. If you need people to spend 2 hours a day on your app in order for them to do something differently and better, you have not built a good intervention.
No, right. You have built TikTok.
Yeah, it's about the quality of attention that people give your intervention rather than quantity. That's more of the you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also because I'm trained as a social psychologist, my degree is in organizational psychology, but really that is social psychology for businesses.
Nicely put.
So I'm a big believer in environmental influence on behavior. And I think a lot of what I want to do as a behavior change designer, as a practitioner, is help people to sculpt their environments in a way that gets them to achieve a goal. So if you set up your environment a certain way, again, that should be kind of self-perpetuating after you get it all set up. It's kind of a big, heavy initial effort that then pays dividends over time. And that's a little bit different from requiring somebody to come every single day and interact with your intervention.
So if someone won't want to apply this to themselves and to their own lives, would you have any direct tips for them to change their environment for the better?
One thing that I have found makes a big difference in my own life is if there's something I want to do, make the equipment or tools for it really easy to access. So now with the pandemic, my exercise routines have changed, and I hate yoga, but I have a yoga mat, and I used to have it in the back of my storage room. Mm-hmm. And I've started doing some home weightlifting workouts, and it's good to have a mat for those. I'm on a carpet and I don't need to sweat on my carpet. I moved the yoga mat. I moved it out. I actually have it underneath the bed in the room where I do my workouts. Mm-hmm. And I don't have to search for it or climb over other things. And it's made a big difference because now that yoga mat is right there, I actually will use it. I've removed a bunch of the barriers to using it. And some of it is I buy things for myself that I enjoy using that support these healthier behaviors. So having a workout outfit that I feel good in, that flatters me and is comfortable, that makes a difference, because then I'll put it on, and I'm not just putting it on because I have to go do this dreaded thing. I'm putting it on because I also look cute doing it.
Fair play.
Hey, hell yeah. Yeah. This is why I've just sort of justified I've spent a couple of £100 on a brand new monitor as sort of being now I've got this amazing new monitor, which I've spent ages researching. I'm going to use it, and hopefully I'll use it more for work and not just for Netflix.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I use it a lot with cooking stuff too, because my husband and I both enjoy cooking. And at some point I realized, you know what, it's worth it for us to have a nicer saute pan, because we will use it, and we're more likely to use it if we know that we're not going to have to be scrubbing gunk off of, the battered old one.
Yes.
Yep.
We're still in the student lifestyle right now, so that cuts a little bit too close to home.
Yeah, I'm telling you, the best thing about getting married was wedding gifts. Not even the husband.
I mean, Sarah and I are both single, but we'll let our future partners know.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good incentive for me to maybe get on the dating apps.
Yeah, I can say that now because I've been married a long time, but
Perfect.
My husband didn't appreciate it as much when we were newlyweds.
I think just in general, I mean, where do you see behavioral design going in the next 10 years? What are you hoping for? What are you afraid of? But ultimately, what do you actually think is going to happen here in this field?
So I am super excited about what is happening with behavioral design. When I I graduated with my PhD in 2006, and my first few jobs, I felt like I had to really fight to make a case for why a behavior scientist wanted to work in an applied design setting. Mm-hmm. Now there are jobs that are for behavior change designers. That is now an accepted role in a lot of organizations, not just MadPow. So there's a spreadsheet that Ingrid Pollan put together that is organizations globally that have behavior change as part of the skill sets they hire. That is such an exciting change to me, to see that in the last 15 years, so many companies have recognized what behavior scientists can bring to their work. Mm-hmm. And I think that is only going to continue to grow. We're seeing more companies now that have a chief behavioral officer role. We're seeing these so we see people with behavior science training who are occupying roles like researcher, but we also now see roles that specifically have behavior change or behavior science in the job title. I see this momentum towards really explicitly including behavior scientists in the team at all kinds of different companies. And I think that is awesome. I'm really, really excited for that. My fear relates to some of what we were talking about around this urgency to see results and, really pushing for more usage, more time on site, that kind of thing as a success metric, because so much of behavior science is actually looking at longer term or sustained changes. So how can we get people to do things differently from now on? And maybe these changes are small, so it takes some time for them to yield measurable results. And so one of my fears is that if we don't get companies to have enough patience with what behavior change can do, what behavior science can do, that they'll lose faith in it. So I think we have a lot of work to do to set expectations, to really communicate clearly about our process and about the smaller successes that we see as we go through that process, so that companies understand that this is all ultimately going to yield pretty big results. It just takes some patience in terms of setting it up and doing it right at the outset.
Well, Amy, we're so glad that we have you in behavioral science to be a pioneer in this field and to keep pushing us, to be better and to be applying behavioral science. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. I mean, the very, very last thing would be, if the listener has really liked what they've heard today and they do want to sort of follow you and follow your progress and hear more from you, where can they find you online?
So I've mentioned Twitter. I am on Twitter. My handle is Amy B PhD. I do have a website, which is amybucherphd.com. I couldn't get it without the PhD because there's a photographer with my same name. Lovely work, but she's not me. I am not good about keeping that site up to date these days just because I've been so busy, but my intention is to try to blog there and, just kind of put out brief commentary on some of the things that are on my mind with respect to applied behavior science. And I do try to keep a listing there of, various conference talks I've given, podcasts that I've been interviewed on, things like that. So if you were kind of looking for a directory of some of those things, my website is a good place for that. And then I had a book come out earlier this year with Rosenfeld Media called Engage, Designing for Behavior Change. And that is really intended for people more from the design and the UX background who don't have a lot of behavior science training, but want to start to pull that into their skill set. So if that describes you, the book is a really great way to kind of learn what I'm about and hopefully, build up some of your own competencies in behavior science.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for making the time. We had an absolutely great chat. And I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did. Thank you so much. I can't wait to have this come out. And I'm really excited that we are, all in this field together.
So that was our conversation with Amy. But so many interesting things we managed to talk about with Amy, designing sort of healthy behaviors and also to help people improve their finances and those type of decisions, but also talking about ethics and, technology and sort of thinking about, are the incentives aligned between sort of companies and the consumers, that sort of consumer experience. What's important? What should we be measuring as sort of an outcome for success? And I know, Melly, you've had some thoughts recently about sort of the changes made on LinkedIn. So it becomes more Facebooky. But yeah, I mean, is that sort of a key aspect of sort of behavioral design that you really notice, I guess, now going onto these social media websites?
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure. So I use LinkedIn much more than I use Facebook anyway, because apparently that's the type of personality I am. But I don't like it. I really don't like it. Maybe because I'm a creature of habit. I resist change. I don't know, maybe it's that. But it's just, Facebook to me has I'm kind of over it, to be quite frank. And I think LinkedIn is just moving more towards being, it used to be that if someone asked for your CV, you could literally send them your LinkedIn profile, and that should essentially do you. Because it is that complete, or now it just looks more like a social media network where I'm adding on professionals for the sake. I don't really add anyone, to be quite frank. I mainly do it.
What, everyone adds you?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't give up my number. They just contact me.
No, it's more as in, because I use LinkedIn for my writing, and also to promote the podcast to some extent. So for me, it's very much, I just push my content onto LinkedIn, and then sometimes people come to me. Yeah, we need to skip over this. But like the fact that it's now looking more like Facebook is just gives such a different connotation as to what this platform should be. And I think will, as a result, have people interact differently with it. And I'm not necessarily sure. I mean, it's behavioral design, and it's good behavioral design to the extent that I'm sure it will invoke a reaction, and a very clearly measurable reaction. I'm just not entirely sure that's the reaction you want.
Well, I mean, that I guess that depends on whose perspective you're looking at.
Sure.
In terms of, I guess, the social media companies, they sort of create revenue through ad revenue and engagement, and sort of keeping you on the same page for longer. So yeah, I think it is interesting. I've actually sort of noticed, beyond LinkedIn, also dating apps have started looking like social media profiles. Hinge, really? For example, and it's almost as though like if the aim of the app or the platform is the same, right, to sort of increase engagement, increase the amount of time each user spends, like in the interface, right? Then the sort of the design of these different apps, originally with different purposes. One, to find compatible dates. One to sort of boost your career. Another to sort of stay in contact with your friends and your aunt who lives, off in another country somewhere. Like they all start looking the same, which I find kind of strange. This homogenization, but it may be not surprising. Yeah,
maybe not surprising. I mean, at the end of the day, Facebook owns God knows how many social media outlets, because Facebook already owns Instagram, and I've always been quite surprised that takeover didn't result in quite a lot of changes on Instagram as a platform. At least I don't think there were that many changes. Maybe there were. I'm just not that active on Instagram. But I mean, if maybe it's just that they haven't notified us of Facebook also having purchased LinkedIn. Maybe that's secretly what happened. What the hell do we know?
There's like this huge monopoly corporation, like, I don't know, umbrella corporation behind all of this. But I think it raises some interesting question about ethics, really. And I think we touched on a lot of that, with Amy about, people on Facebook. Yes, you sign like a terms and conditions, or you sort of accept a terms of service, but you're not really signing up to be, to sort of be put in this sort of bubble of only seeing certain types of information based on your sort of demographics. And it's strange. And I think Amy makes a good point that, it wouldn't have been acceptable if it was
in a court. Yeah. As stand. Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, God knows what you've agreed to. No one reads the terms and conditions. Like, I'm sorry, but I have a feeling that if you were to print the terms and conditions, it's thicker than the Bible. I'm not reading
it's not designed. Yeah, it's not designed for people to actually read it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They don't want you to read it. They just need it there, for this legal cover of the backside. But yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked about so much this episode and only been able to recap some of it, but we hope you enjoyed the episode today. And, if you did find it interesting, if it did spark any thoughts or potential PhD topics or research collaborations, then let us know. We'd love to hear from you on our social media. And that's all just to say thank you very much for listening. Thanks so much for giving us a bit of your time today. We really appreciate it. And we hope you tune back in next week when we'll be dropping a brand new episode into your podcast feed wherever you're listening. All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Have a nice week.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one I love. You're the one I wanna give.